The slick, heavy cardstock felt alien in Eleanor Vance's trembling fingers, the official seal of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, embossed with an almost mocking formality. But it was the stark, bolded sentence 3 lines down that truly sucked the air from her lungs, stealing the quiet, sunlit peace that usually permeated her kitchen. Failure to conform to specified aesthetic guidelines by EO1 15, 2025 will result in mandatory demolition proceedings. Demolition. The word echoed in the profound silence of the century-old home, a cruel, impossible pronouncement for a structure that wasn't just a house, not merely a collection of bricks and mortar, but a living, breathing testament to American history, formally recognized and cherished as a certified National Historic Landmark. Eleanor had lived in this house, 14-22 Elmwood Lane, since she was a small child, inheriting it from her grandmother, a fierce historian and amateur preservationist who had tirelessly campaigned for its landmark status decades ago, ensuring that its ornate Victorian trim, the unique turret that caught the morning light like a gemstone, and the sprawling, untouched native perennial gardens were protected for posterity. Every creaking floorboard held a memory, every dust mote dancing, in a sunbeam seemed to whisper tales of generations, of artists and activists, of inventors and quiet thinkers who had walked these very halls, contributing to the rich tapestry of the nation's past and its very foundation, composed of hand-cut, local stone, felt like an extension of her own bones, deeply rooted in the soil of this small, unassuming town she had always called home. The HOA's initial correspondences had been little more than annoyances, a series of increasingly persnickety notices that had begun months ago, each one a subtle chipping away at the unique character of her beloved property. First, it was the unapproved shade of cerulean blue on the window frames, a color chosen by her grandmother in the 1960s to match a rare blue heron feather she'd found near the creek, a hue that had been part of the house's charm for over half a century. Then came the demand to replace the original wrought iron gate, an antique piece dating back to the house's construction in 1898 because its intricate scrollwork was deemed non-uniform with the simplified modern aesthetics of Willow Creek Estates. Then the seemingly absurd decree that her sprawling, wild-looking native wildflower garden, a vibrant, ecological haven humming with bees and butterflies that was deliberately designed to reflect early American landscape aesthetics, was overgrown and non-compliant with manicured lawn requirements, demanding its replacement with a sterile monoculture, turf. Each letter had been met with Eleanor's polite but firm resistance, backed by reams of documentation from historical societies, architectural review boards, and even her house's original blueprints, all confirming the protected nature of every single element the HOA deemed problematic, solidifying her unwavering conviction that her property, by virtue of its landmark status, was exempt from the HOA's more arbitrary aesthetic diktats. But the most recent letter, delivered by hand, with an unsettling urgency, had escalated beyond mere aesthetic grievances, now threatening the very existence of her sanctuary, escalating from fines and threats of legal action to the chilling ultimatum of demolition, a blunt force trauma of bureaucracy against history. It specifically cited non-conformity with the core architectural style of the community and failure to adhere to standardized exterior material guidelines, demands that were not only illogical but fundamentally incompatible with the house's federally protected status, demands that would require gutting the very soul of the structure, stripping it of its historical integrity, effectively demolishing it piece by piece under the guise of conforming to a bland, cookie-cutter suburban ideal that stood in direct opposition to everything her home represented. Eleanor reread the phrase mandatory demolition proceedings multiple times, her mind refusing to process the words, a cold dread seeping into her core, blurring the vibrant colors of her historical wallpaper into a dull, menacing blur. How could a neighborhood association, no matter how powerful, dictate the destruction of a national historic landmark? The absurdity of it was breathtaking, an audacious affront not just to her personal property rights but to the very concept of historical preservation. Yet the cold, official tone of the letter, signed by the HOA president, Mr. Silas Thorne, left no room for doubt about their intent. Initial shock quickly morphed into a furious resolve, a burning determination igniting deep within her, replacing the fear with a steeliness she hadn't known she possessed. They wanted a fight, did they? They wanted to erase history for the sake of uniformity. Eleanor Vance, keeper of 1422 Elmwood Lane, would show them what happens when you try to demolish a legacy. The cold dread from the HOA's demolition ultimatum had swiftly crystallized into a burning resolve within Eleanor, focusing her energy like a laser on the very essence of what they sought to destroy. The history embedded within her home's very foundations, a history she was now compelled to meticulously re-excavate, not just for herself but as a weapon in the looming battle. She spent days, then weeks, immersed in dusty archives at the Willow Creek Public Library, poring over brittle microfiche newspaper clippings, cross-referencing deeds at the county clerk's office, and meticulously indexing her grandmother's voluminous collection of meticulously preserved letters, diaries, and local historical society records that filled an entire wall of the house's quaint, sun-drenched study. What she uncovered transcended mere architectural significance. 1422 Elmwood Lane. The unassuming Victorian with the distinctive turret was far more than a beautiful old house. It had served as a clandestine meeting point for prominent suffragettes in the early 20th century. Its hidden third-floor attic, accessible only by a cleverly disguised pull-down ladder, having once secretly housed a printing press that churned out pamphlets advocating for women's voting rights, risking arrest and social ostracization at every turn. A detail whispered in her grandmother's old journals that spoke of midnight deliveries and hushed, impassioned debates under the watchful gaze of the moon. Later, during the Great Depression, the expansive pantry and root cellar, now part of her modernized kitchen, had discreetly functioned as a covert distribution point for a local mutual aid society, providing food and warmth to struggling families, a beacon of quiet resilience in times of despair, documented in poignant anonymous thank-you notes tucked within antique cookbooks. The house had also, for a brief but pivotal period, been the temporary residence of Professor Alistair Finch, a little-known but brilliant botanist whose groundbreaking work on indigenous plant strains in the region had inadvertently laid the groundwork for modern agricultural techniques. His meticulously drawn sketches of local flora still discernible on the plaster of an old closet wall, now faded but still whispering of forgotten scientific discovery. Each revelation, each unearthed anecdote, solidified Eleanor's profound connection to the house and underscored its undeniable status as a certified National Historic Landmark, transforming it from a personal haven into a public trust, a tangible link to the struggles and triumphs of generations past, making the HOA's demand for its demolition an even more egregious act of historical vandalism. Armed with this newfound arsenal of historical data and fortified by an unshakable belief in her cause, Eleanor initiated her attempts to formally negotiate with the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, hoping that reason and irrefutable evidence would prevail over their arbitrary demands. Her first attempt was a polite, detailed letter, meticulously outlining the house's landmark status, attaching copies of federal and state preservation certificates, and providing a concise summary of the historical findings that she believed unequivocally exempted her property from their more draconian aesthetic policies. The response was a form letter, dismissive and curt, reiterating the conform or demolish ultimatum and citing obscure bylaws about community aesthetic harmony, without addressing any of her points. Subsequent phone calls to the HOA office were met with a wall of bureaucratic indifference, Pleasant-sounding receptionists would transfer her endlessly, leading to voicemails that were never returned, or connect her to senior compliance officers, who spoke in rehearsed corporate platitudes, robotically repeating phrases like strict adherence to governing documents and preserving property values for all residents, as if her historic home was an eyesore diminishing their perfectly manicured suburban dream. At an HOA board meeting she attended, attempting to make her case in person, she was granted a mere 5 minutes during a public comment section, where her impassioned plea was met with stony silence from the board members, led by the impeccably coiffed but utterly unyielding Mr. Silas Thorne, who simply nodded blandly as she spoke, before curtly reminding her that her time was up and that the board's decision stands. It became horrifyingly clear that negotiation was a futile exercise. The HOA wasn't interested in dialogue, history, or even common sense. They were interested only in absolute compliance, a rigid, inflexible vision of uniformity that brooked no deviation, a chilling realization that fueled Eleanor's growing indignation and underscored the necessity of a far more forceful approach. The realization that she could not fight this battle alone pushed Eleanor to reluctantly seek legal counsel, a daunting prospect given the anticipated financial burden and the complexities of property law. She found Mr. Elias Henderson, a seasoned, slightly rumpled lawyer whose office, filled with stacks of legal tomes and the comforting scent of old paper, exuded an air of quiet competence rather than flashy promises. Henderson listened patiently, his keen eyes scanning the documents Eleanor had brought, occasionally nodding slowly as she recounted the HOA's escalating demands and her home's storied past. "This isn't going to be easy, Eleanor," he finally stated, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. "HOAs wield significant power. They have armies of lawyers, and they often exploit loopholes to enforce their vision, even against federal protections. We're talking about a landmark case, potentially setting a precedent. It will be a lengthy and expensive fight, emotionally draining, and they will likely try to bury us in paperwork and legal maneuvers." He explained the various avenues they could pursue: a cease and desist order, an injunction to prevent demolition, and ultimately a full lawsuit challenging the HOA's authority. The initial retainer fee alone was a staggering sum, one that made Eleanor's stomach clench with anxiety, a testament to the immense financial challenge that lay ahead. Yet looking at the determined glint in Mr. Henderson's eyes, a faint echo of her own resolve, she knew she had no other choice. This wasn't just about money. It was about protecting a piece of the nation's soul. As Eleanor and Mr. Henderson began the laborious process of preparing their legal case, assembling evidence, drafting motions, and filing preliminary paperwork, the story of 1422 Elmwood Lane, the historic house facing demolition by its HOA, slowly began to seep into the local consciousness, first as a trickle, then a nascent stream. A local history blogger, a sharp-eyed retiree named Martha Jenkins, who had followed Eleanor's grandmother's preservation efforts decades ago, caught wind of the story through a hushed conversation at the library and published a detailed, impassioned post titled "History Under Threat: Willow Creek HOA versus National Landmark," chronicling the house's past and the current outrageous demands. This blog post, shared within a small but active online community of local history enthusiasts, was picked up by a fledgling online newspaper, the Willow Creek Gazette, which ran a small piece in its community section, highlighting the controversy and including a grainy photo of Eleanor's house. A few residents, intrigued by the sensational headline or recognizing the house from their childhoods, started sharing it on their local Facebook groups, sparking initial comments of outrage and disbelief. Snippets of the story, like seeds scattered by the wind, were starting to take root, germinating curiosity and sympathy among a small but growing segment of the public, the first faint rumblings of a potential groundswell of support against the seemingly insurmountable bureaucracy of the HOA. The Homeowners Association, spearheaded by the unyielding Mr. Silas Thorne, intensified their campaign against Eleanor Vance and 1422 Elmwood Lane with a cold, relentless precision that moved far beyond mere demands for conformity, quickly escalating into a psychological and financial siege designed to break her spirit and force her surrender. Daily fines for non-compliance began to arrive, not just for the garden or the window frames, but for newly invented infractions like excessive, exterior patina, and unauthorized historical scent, each notice a thinly veiled act of harassment. She received official-looking letters threatening liens on her property, demands for immediate payment for hypothetical damages allegedly caused by her refusal to update the house, and even a spurious notice that her utilities would be disconnected due to violation of aesthetic energy consumption patterns, a ludicrous claim that Mr. Henderson quickly squashed, but which left Eleanor shaken and increasingly paranoid. HOA hired inspectors, intimidating figures with clipboards and cold stares, began showing up unannounced, meticulously documenting every chipped paint flake or slightly askew shingle, submitting reports filled with exaggerated claims and falsified deficiencies designed to build a damning dossier against her. Rumors, subtle at first, then increasingly brazen, began to circulate through the community, whispered by HOA members in grocery store aisles and at community events, that Eleanor was unreasonable, stubborn, holding up progress, or even mentally unstable for clinging to an old ruin that was dragging down property values for everyone else, a smear campaign designed to isolate her and turn her neighbors against her. The relentless pressure was palpable, a constant, suffocating weight that settled over Eleanor, making it difficult to breathe, to think, to find a moment of peace even within the walls of her beloved home. The personal toll on Eleanor was profound, a slow, corrosive erosion of her once vibrant spirit. Sleep became an elusive luxury, her nights plagued by anxious thoughts and the imagined sounds of bulldozers at her doorstep, leaving her drained and perpetually exhausted during the day. She began to neglect her small online antique business, the delicate work of restoring old curiosities now overshadowed by the overwhelming, brutal reality of her legal battle, causing her already strained finances to dwindle precariously. The escalating legal fees from Mr. Henderson's firm becoming a monstrous, ever-growing shadow over her bank account. Her once robust social life withered. Some friends, uncomfortable with the escalating conflict or swayed by the HOA's propaganda, slowly distanced themselves, their once frequent calls and invitations becoming less and less frequent until they ceased altogether, leaving Eleanor feeling profoundly isolated, battling not just an impersonal bureaucracy but a growing sense of loneliness. She found herself skipping meals, losing weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame, her vibrant eyes now shadowed with fatigue and worry, the sparkle that once defined her dulled by the constant stress. There were days when the sheer weight of the fight seemed insurmountable, when the powerful monolithic force of the HOA, with its endless resources and ruthless determination, felt like an unstoppable tide against which she, a single individual, was powerless, leading to moments of profound despair where she questioned whether it was all worth it, whether she should simply give up and let them have their way, let them erase a century of history for the sake of their sterile uniformity. Yet, even in her darkest moments, glimmers of hope began to appear, manifesting in a diverse constellation of unlikely allies who, drawn by the sheer audacity of the HOA's demands and the profound injustice of Eleanor's plight, began to rally to her aid, forming a grassroots resistance that defied the HOA's calculated isolation tactics. Martha Jenkins, the sharp-eyed history blogger who had first broken the story locally, became Eleanor's indefatigable unofficial publicist, constantly updating her blog with new historical findings Eleanor unearthed, sharing news of legal filings, and meticulously exposing the HOA's increasingly shady maneuvers, her passionate posts resonating deeply with the growing online audience. Then there was Chloe Vance, a whip-smart, politically active college student from the local university, no relation to Eleanor, but with a shared surname that delighted the media, who stumbled upon Martha's blog and was immediately outraged by the injustice. Chloe, with her prodigious social media skills, launched a Save 1422 Elmwood Lane campaign across Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok, creating visually compelling short videos that juxtaposed the house's beauty and history with the HOA's absurd demands, crafting catchy hashtags that rapidly gained traction and brought the story to a younger, more digitally native audience. Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned architectural historian and professor at a prestigious East Coast university, contacted Eleanor after seeing Chloe's viral content. Utterly appalled by the threat to a nationally recognized landmark, he offered his expert testimony pro bono, providing invaluable professional weight and academic credibility to Eleanor's case, confirming the house's unique significance in American architectural and social history. Even Mrs. Rodriguez, a stern but kind retired schoolteacher who lived 2 houses down and had initially kept her distance, began leaving freshly baked bread on Eleanor's doorstep, a silent gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes, having grown, increasingly disgusted by the HOA's bullying tactics which were now impacting other neighbors for minor, trumped-up infractions. Realizing that if Eleanor's house could be threatened, no one's property was truly safe. It was Chloe's persistent and ingenious social media campaign that truly exploded the story beyond local confines, acting as the catalyst that propelled Eleanor's personal battle onto the national stage. Her TikTok videos, with their succinct, emotional appeals and rapid-fire presentation of historical facts, began racking up millions of views, reaching demographics typically uninterested in HOA disputes or historical preservation. One particular video, showing a time-lapse of the house through old photographs set against audio of a chilling HOA demand letter, went massively viral, shared by influencers and celebrities alike. Mainstream media, always on the lookout for compelling human interest stories with a strong David versus Goliath narrative, began to take notice. First, a regional newspaper, the New England Chronicle, ran a prominent feature on its front page, complete with stunning photographs of 1422 Elmwood Lane and a sympathetic interview with Eleanor. Then, a segment on a national morning show, America Today, picked up the story, sending a crew to Willow Creek to film Eleanor and her house, interviewing Martha Jenkins and even Mr. Henderson, who deftly articulated the legal quagmire and the broader implications for historical preservation nationwide. Soon, news channels like CNN and MSNBC were running breaking news alerts, using headlines that screamed, "Historic home under siege," and "Bureaucracy threatens national treasure," transforming Eleanor from a solitary homeowner into the reluctant face of a national debate on property rights, historical integrity, and the often overreaching power of homeowners associations. Despite the growing wave of public support and the tireless efforts of her burgeoning team of allies, there came a moment of profound doubt for Eleanor, a dark night of the soul when the sheer enormity of the fight, the emotional exhaustion, and the relentless financial strain threatened to consume her. It happened one late evening, after yet another frustrating call with Mr. Henderson about mounting legal costs and the HOA's latest delaying tactics. Eleanor sat alone in the dim light of her study, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and historical research, feeling the crushing weight of it all. The house, usually a source of comfort and strength, suddenly felt like an impossible burden, its history a heavy chain rather than a cherished legacy. "What am I doing?" she whispered into the silence, her voice hoarse, tears silently tracing paths down her tired cheeks. "Is this really worth losing everything for? My savings, my peace of mind, my friends? Maybe they're right. Maybe it's just an old house. Maybe I should just let them demolish it. Move on. Escape this nightmare." For a long, agonizing moment, the thought of surrender was overwhelmingly tempting, a promise of sweet relief from the crushing pressure. But then her gaze fell upon a faded, framed photograph on her desk. Her grandmother, Young and vibrant, standing proudly in front of the house in the 1960s, a determined smile on her face, clutching a handful of suffragette pamphlets. Eleanor reached out, her fingers tracing the image, a vivid memory of her grandmother's fierce dedication to this very house, to its history, to the principles it represented, flooding her mind. She thought of the suffragettes, the mutual aid network, Professor Finch, all the struggles and quiet triumphs these walls had witnessed. She thought of Chloe, Martha, Mr. Henderson, and even Mrs. Rodriguez, all fighting alongside her, believing in her cause. A deep, steadying breath filled her lungs, and as she looked around the familiar room, a flicker of that original resolve reignited within her, not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her, and all those who believed in the fight for history. "No," she murmured, her voice stronger now, wiping away her tears. "This isn't just an old house. This is history. This is my home, and they won't take it." Her determination, forged in the crucible of despair, was now harder, purer, and more unyielding than ever before. The air in Courtroom 3B hung thick with anticipation, heavy as the antique oak paneling that lined its walls, mirroring the oppressive weight in Eleanor Vance's chest as she watched Mr. Silas Thorne, the impeccably tailored and infuriatingly composed president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, take the stand. The past few weeks had been a blur of legal jargon, late-night strategy sessions with Mr. Henderson, and the constant hum of media attention that now circled her life like a flock of expectant vultures. But this was it. The crucible. The moment. Everything hung in the balance. The gallery was packed, a sea of faces ranging from sympathetic neighbors to curious reporters and history enthusiasts, their collective gaze a mixture of hope and skepticism, their presence a silent testament to the national significance this localized battle had unexpectedly achieved, a powerful, unspoken pressure on both sides of the courtroom. Mr. Henderson began his case with a powerful, understated opening statement, laying out the narrative with the precision of a master craftsman, painting a clear picture of a private association overreaching its authority to threaten a national treasure, using phrases like unprecedented assault on historical preservation and bureaucratic tyranny. His first star witness was Dr. Eris Thorne, the renowned architectural historian, whose testimony was a captivating journey through the very fabric of 1422 Elmwood Lane, meticulously detailing its unique Victorian architectural elements, its construction techniques, and its remarkably preserved original features. Dr. Thorne spoke eloquently, almost reverently, about the house's rare Eastlake style, its perfectly proportioned turret, and the hand-carved details that were emblematic of a specific, pivotal era in American design, emphasizing how each element, individually and collectively, contributed to its federally recognized landmark status, making any alteration, let alone demolition, a grievous and irreversible loss to the nation's cultural heritage, not just a localized property dispute. He dismissed the HOA's claims of nonconformity as architecturally illiterate and historically ignorant, stating that the house's very value lay in its distinctiveness, its refusal to conform to modern, generic aesthetics. His expert analysis was a scholarly broadside against the HOA's arbitrary aesthetic demands, leaving an undeniable impression on the jury, a stark contrast to the bland uniformity promoted by the prosecution. Then came Eleanor's turn on the stand, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her voice, though tinged with emotion, remained steady. Under Mr. Henderson's gentle questioning, she recounted her lifelong connection to the house, describing her grandmother's dedication, the suffragette printing press in the attic, the Depression-era mutual aid efforts in the cellar, and Professor Finch's botanical sketches, transforming dry facts into a vibrant tapestry of human stories. She spoke of the emotional toll of the HOA's escalating harassment, the sleepless nights, the financial drain, the isolation, conveying the profound personal agony of having her home, her history, her very identity threatened by an entity driven by what appeared to be nothing more than petty spite. Her testimony was a powerful humanizing force, laying bare the deeply personal stakes behind the legal battle, making the jury see beyond the legal arguments to the woman fighting for her soul, for her legacy, and for a piece of shared American history. "This isn't just about my house," Eleanor concluded, her voice cracking slightly but gaining strength. "It's about whether history, heritage, and individual liberty can stand against arbitrary power. It's about whether we protect the past or pave over it for convenience and profit." A palpable hush fell over the courtroom, the weight of her words settling over every spectator, a testament to her quiet courage. The HOA's defense, led by their sharp, aggressive counsel, Mr. Sterling Finch, was predictably rigid and dismissive. Mr. Finch hammered away at the HOA's bylaws, presenting them as inviolable sacred texts, arguing that Eleanor, by purchasing a home within Willow Creek Estates, had implicitly agreed to abide by all its rules, regardless of her property's historical status. He called Mr. Silas Thorne to the stand, who, under direct examination, maintained an air of dignified grievance, portraying the HOA as simply fulfilling its duty to maintain community standards and property values for all residents. Thorne recited a litany of supposed violations: the unapproved paint color, the overgrown gardens, the non-compliant gate, each one framed as a deliberate act of defiance on Eleanor's part. He skillfully sidestepped questions about the house's landmark status, dismissing it as a technicality that did not supersede the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. During cross-examination, however, Mr. Henderson began to chip away at Thorne's composed facade. He pressed Thorne on the seemingly arbitrary nature of the violations, the sudden escalation of demands, and the refusal to engage in any meaningful dialogue, forcing Thorne into increasingly evasive and contradictory answers. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson finally pressed, his voice quiet but piercing, "isn't it true that the HOA recently approved a zoning change request that would allow for a multi-unit luxury condominium complex to be built on the vacant lot directly adjacent to Ms. Vance's property? A complex that would significantly increase the value of certain existing properties within the HOA, particularly those owned by board members." Thorne's jaw visibly tightened, his eyes darting towards his lawyer, but he maintained, "That's irrelevant, counselor. We are discussing compliance." The courtroom buzzed with a sudden electric energy. Mr. Henderson, with a dramatic flourish, then presented a series of meticulously prepared exhibits, a copy of an internal HOA development proposal, dated just weeks before Eleanor received her demolition ultimatum, outlining plans for the Willow Creek Commons, a luxury condominium development, a corporate email chain from a large development firm, Evergreen Holdings, discussing a contingent purchase of the very plot where 14 and 22 Elmwood Lane stood, with explicit mention of resolving existing structures. And finally, a meticulously compiled spreadsheet detailing significant unexplained financial contributions from Evergreen Holdings to a shell corporation directly linked to Mr. Silas Thorne and two other senior HOA board members, showing transactions occurring shortly before the HOA's aggressive campaign against Eleanor began. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The HOA's true motive wasn't about aesthetics or property values for everyone. It was about greed, about clearing Eleanor's historic home to make way for a lucrative development that would enrich a select few on the board, leveraging their power to illegally seize a nationally recognized landmark for personal profit. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as the implications sunk in, reporters frantically scribbling notes, photographers snapping pictures, and the once impassive faces of the jury now etched with shock and dawning comprehension. The loop of the story finally revealing its dark, corrupt core. Mr. Thorne's carefully constructed composure finally crumbled, his face paling as he stammered, Objection. Speculation. This is a smear campaign. But the damage was done. The judge, his expression grim, allowed the evidence to stand. The true colors of the HOA laid bare for all to see. The final emotional testimony came from Eleanor herself, recalled, to the stand by Mr. Henderson, to address the newly revealed corruption. She stood tall, her voice clear and resonant, no longer just defending her house but articulating the larger fight for integrity and heritage. "This house," she began, her gaze sweeping across the jury, "is not just a building, it's a memory keeper. It remembers the whispers of women fighting for their right to vote, the silent gratitude of hungry families fed in secret, the quiet genius of a man who saw the world differently. It stands as a physical manifestation of resilience, of community, of quiet heroism. The HOA called it non-compliant. I call it tenacious. They called it overgrown. I call it alive. They want to demolish it for profit, to erase its stories, to bury a piece of who we are as a nation. But these stories, these memories, they are not just walls and wood. They are the spirit of Willow Creek, the spirit of America. And some things," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction, "cannot be demolished, no matter how much concrete you pour over them." The courtroom fell silent once more, a profound, almost sacred hush, the weight of her words lingering in the air long after. She finished, after a brief recess for the closing arguments, which Mr. Henderson delivered with a fiery passion, contrasting the beauty of history with the ugliness of greed, and Mr. Finch presented with a desperate, flailing defense. The judge began his final instructions to the jury, his voice solemn. The deliberation room door clicked shut, sealing the fate of 1422 Elmwood Lane, and with it a piece of American history. Eleanor sat, clutching Mr. Henderson's hand, her gaze fixed on the closed door, every breath an agony, every second stretching into an eternity, waiting, hoping, praying for the verdict that would either save her home or condemn it to dust. The agonizing wait in the hushed courtroom felt like an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the frantic thrumming in Eleanor Vance's ears, her hand clasped so tightly in Mr. Henderson's that her knuckles were white, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak door leading to the jury room, which had sealed itself shut hours ago, holding the fate of 1422 Elmwood Lane and a century of history hostage. Every breath was a silent prayer, every second a raw nerve, as the weight of the past few months, the relentless pressure, the mounting despair, and the fragile tendrils of hope all converged into this singular, unbearable moment. Then a sudden, sharp click, and the door creaked open, revealing the somber faces of the jurors as they filed back into the box, their expressions unreadable, sending a fresh jolt of anxiety through Eleanor's already frayed nerves. The judge returned to his bench, his voice a low, formal drone that barely cut through the deafening silence of the expectant gallery, and asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, stood clutching a folded piece of paper and in a voice that was clear and unwavering, pronounced the words that would forever echo in Eleanor's heart, tearing through the suffocating tension, like a beacon of light. "We have, Your Honor. In the case of Vance v. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, we find, for the plaintiff, Eleanor Vance." A collective gasp, then a wave of audible relief swept through the courtroom, quickly followed by spontaneous applause and a chorus of whispered shouts of "Yes!" and "She won!" Eleanor's knees buckled and she crumpled slightly, a sob escaping. Her lips, not of sadness but of pure, unadulterated relief, as Mr. Henderson enveloped her in a tight, congratulatory embrace, his own usually stoic face breaking into a wide, joyous grin, tears glistening in his eyes. The courtroom immediately erupted into a chaotic, jubilant scene, a whirlwind of flashing cameras, shouting reporters, and weeping supporters rushing forward to embrace Eleanor, a testament to the powerful hold her story had taken on the national consciousness. News crews, having waited impatiently outside, surged into the courtroom like a breaking dam, their microphones thrust into Eleanor's face, eager to capture her first words of victory. I'm just so overwhelmed," she stammered, her voice thick with emotion, tears still streaming down her face but a radiant smile breaking through. "This isn't just a victory for me. It's a victory for history, for preservation, for everyone who believes that some things are more important than profit or conformity. This house, it will stand. Its stories will continue." Mr. Henderson, ever the composed professional, stepped forward to address the press, eloquently articulating the legal implications of the verdict, emphasizing its potential precedent for protecting historical landmarks from arbitrary HOA overreach. His words, resonating with clarity amidst the celebratory din. Meanwhile, the consequences for the corrupt HOA members were immediate and brutal. As the verdict was read, Mr. Silas Thorne, who had maintained his composure throughout the trial, visibly deflated, his face turning ashen as the full weight of the exposure crashed down upon him, his career and reputation shattered in an instant. Within hours of the verdict, news agencies were reporting on the rapid unraveling of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association's leadership. The detailed evidence presented by Mr. Henderson, particularly the illicit financial transactions, with Evergreen Holdings and the Shell Corporation linked to Thorne and his co-conspirators on the board, swiftly triggered a criminal investigation by both state and federal authorities, with arrests for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of power, following within days, sending shockwaves through the entire community. Thorne, along with 2 other key board members implicated in the scheme, resigned in disgrace, facing not only severe legal repercussions, but also the scathing condemnation of their former neighbors, who now saw them not as guardians of community standards, but as venal opportunists willing to destroy history for personal gain. The remaining HOA board members, facing a barrage of public outcry and a complete loss of trust, were forced to initiate a comprehensive internal audit and began the arduous process of rebuilding a new, transparent, and ethical HOA structure, a far cry from the rigid, self-serving entity that had almost demolished Eleanor's home. With her home saved and the corrupt elements of the HOA dismantled, Eleanor, rather than simply returning to her quiet life, felt a renewed sense of purpose, a deep-seated responsibility to ensure that 1422 Elmwood Lane would never again face such a threat, and that its rich legacy would be permanently secured for future generations. Collaborating closely with her loyal allies, Martha Jenkins, whose blog posts became a national treasure trove of historical advocacy, Chloe Vance, who continued to harness the power of social media to organize support and raise awareness, and Dr. Eris Thorne, who became an invaluable advisor on historical preservation, Eleanor spearheaded the creation of the Friends of Elmwood Lane Foundation. This nonprofit organization was dedicated not only to the perpetual maintenance and preservation of the house, but also to transforming it into a vibrant, accessible community resource. Through a combination of private donations, small grants from historical societies, and successful crowdfunding campaigns driven by Chloe's online reach, the foundation raised enough capital to establish a permanent conservation easement on the property, a legal instrument that forever protected the house's historical integrity and prevented any future demolition or inappropriate alterations, irrespective of changing HOA rules or ownership. Furthermore, plans were set in motion to open the house to the public for select historical tours on weekends, to host educational workshops for local schoolchildren about the suffragette movement and the Great Depression, and even to allow local artists to use the inspiring spaces for creative residencies, ensuring that the stories within its walls would continue to resonate and educate for centuries to come, transforming the private sanctuary into a cherished public landmark. Eleanor Vance, the quiet historian who had been unwittingly thrust into the national spotlight, emerged from the crucible of this battle profoundly changed, her initial fear and isolation replaced by an unwavering strength and a newfound sense of community. She was no longer just the inheritor of a house, but its fiercest guardian, a reluctant hero whose quiet courage had resonated with millions, inspiring others to fight for what they believed in, to stand up against injustice, and to recognize the irreplaceable value of history. The lines of worry that had etched themselves onto her face during the ordeal softened, replaced by the serene confidence of someone who had faced down an insurmountable challenge and emerged victorious. Her relationship with her allies deepened into an unbreakable bond, forged in the fires of shared adversity, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the confines of Willow Creek. She felt a profound peace now, looking at the familiar turret of her home, knowing it was not only safe but destined to continue its life as a beacon of history and resilience. Eleanor's outlook on life became more expansive, more hopeful. She learned that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with grand gestures, but with quiet determination, unwavering conviction, and the power of truth. The story of 1422 Elmwood Lane, once nearly lost to bureaucratic greed, now stood as an enduring symbol, a vibrant monument to the indomitable spirit of those who choose to protect the past, ensuring that its echoes will continue to inspire a hopeful and inspiring future for generations to come, standing tall against any storm.